Ann, it's so fun to have you on the show today. Just as we were talking before we started recording, I was like, oh, shoot, yeah, I got to record because, we could have kept going and going with this whole idea of body and sensory and somatic stuff. And we're going to go there. But you have a really fascinating, like traumatic story. And I hope you're okay if we start with that. What happened when you were 19?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm totally over it now. It's just a story to me. Yeah. So when I was 19, I woke up one morning and found my mother dead in the bathroom. Now, she had cancer. She did have cancer. She had throat and lung cancer from smoking and drinking. She was an alcoholic, chain smoked, but we weren't expecting her to die at that point. She actually had a tumor in her throat that burst. So, I woke up, wasn't expecting to find that. And it was a huge trauma. And I had no idea to do it. I didn't know therapy existed. I didn't know you could do anything other than just suppress it and carry on with life. That's all I knew.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of go into sort of a survivor mode. I don't know what your family constellation was like. Did you have siblings, or did you feel like you had to pick up the slack for her absence? Was that already a pattern that was established?
We were not a very close family. So I was adopted. So my brother was also adopted from totally different parents, chalk and cheese. We were very different. He wasn't in the house at the time. He was at his girlfriend's house. My dad was working in Saudi Arabia at the time. So I had to, call my dad, get my brother home. So in the short term, I kind of had to pull everything back together. But, I think the mother kind of holds the family together. And it felt like it disintegrated at that point. My dad wanted me to stay home and kind of take her place, like be his housekeeper.
That's what I was wondering, because oftentimes when there's a girl, let's just say in her late teens or even early teens, and the mother is gone, usually that girl will take over those motherly responsibilities.
Yeah, Dad wanted me to do that. In fact, that Christmas, he had me cook a turkey for his mother and his sisters. Like, that was a disaster. I had no idea how to do that.
But yeah, I mean, so what you're saying is this happened, and all of us, when we are all carrying trauma, right? Things that, like, that's a really pronounced one. Your mother dying and you discovering and being alone, and there's a whole spectrum of trauma responses, right? That like two people could have the exact same, let's just say, circumstance or experience that mirrored, and those two people will have completely different responses in their bodies and perceptions of that event.
Absolutely. So I have a pretty interesting story about that. So I had my brother come back. He came back to the house, and he and his girlfriend actually cleaned up because there was a lot of blood in her bedroom and the bathroom. He did that cleaning up. So that traumatized him to an extent. I don't know how much. He's actually already passed. But I found out from his wife many, many years later that his story of the event was that he caught her as she died. He physically caught her as she was dying. He wasn't even in the house at the time. So I think that was maybe maybe he stored guilt that he wasn't there for her. And so that was the way he coped with it. But to me, that was eye-opening, right? That he had lived the next 20, 30 years with that story in his mind.
Sure. Yeah. And I had heard a phrase once, I believe it's Candace Pert, it might be Bruce Lipton. I don't know if you're familiar with their work, but they're very classic, researchers in this field of mind body, but it's perception guides biology. So how two people are perceiving the same event are so subjective, and that perception is what's guiding all of these chemical reactions that ensue from that because of the perception. And when the kind of what they're talking about with the biological aspect is that even epigenetically, like, I don't know if you've studied epigenetics, but like you could have an ancestor or someone in your lines, your family lines, that did experience trauma. It did, we all have those ancestors. And so we're not just they can store that becomes sort of like locked even into their DNA patterning, and they can pass that on. Sometimes it'll skip multiple generations. That's why you can have, a child come into this world and they're just wired almost like fight or flight, or they have the same family dynamic as their sibling, but they're having a completely different perception because biologically, maybe that epigenetic episode was passed on to that child, whereas it was not to the other siblings. I'm just laying that out there for framework because I believe every single one of us are carrying ancestral trauma. Sometimes it's more pronounced in one soul than another because of what they came here to learn or experience. But I can tell you, I've met so many people who finally just awaken to like, this is not just about me. As soon as they depersonalize it, it seems to take out the charge of that trauma a little bit more, because they can kind of be the onlooker of it and just kind of look at it and go, oh, this really isn't about me. And it didn't start with me.
Yeah, so I have a really interesting story about that too, that just happened like last week. So I said I was adopted. Well, this last couple of months, I've actually found out about my birth father. He died in 2013. I have a half sister that I'm just getting to know, which is really fun.
Yeah.
But in the process, I actually received the writings that my dad had done about his life. He wrote down stories from his life. And one of them I just read last week. And it was about how he went through the Blitz in Bristol in 1941 maybe, and the experience of going through his house being bombed. And he talks about the sounds, the smells, like everything about it's very visceral. And as we're recording this, Ukraine is going on, and we're actually seeing that again in our experience. I'm seeing that, and it's like, oh, that's probably living inside of me from his experience, and I had no idea until just the past couple of weeks. So I think it lives vibrationally inside of us.
Sure.
And we kind of attract into the future. If we haven't let it go yet, we attract it again in the future so that we can let it go. So yeah,
and I think when you do recognize that and you say, okay, I see it now, I'm getting triggered by this outside stressor, there's something in me that's unhealed or not looked at that I need to just stop and feel or acknowledge. And seriously, like once you acknowledge it, the power is out of it just by acknowledging it. But we take so much energy to just like push it down, swallow it down, stuff it down, which, we're trying to survive. We got to give ourselves a break. But at some point it's so exhausting. It's more exhausting to push it down than it is to let it out.
Yeah, it takes so much of our energy to do that. That's the burden. We hear about the burden we're carrying. That's what it is. It's that energy we're holding just to keep it in, because it just wants to leave. It's just stuck energy that wants to leave.
That wants to go. So you have a slightly different way of like thinking about the law of attraction. I'm so sick of it, by the way. I'm so sick of hearing about the law of attraction. Like since the late 90s or whenever it was or whatever that I started learning about it. Yeah. What's your take on it? I mean, I think it's just, it's true, but like we need to use different language with it, because I think people just are like, oh, that's so overused. And, it can even be a little cliche now, and then people bypass over it. So I still think it's a powerful concept. I just think we need to use different language. So it seems like you're agreeing with me on that.
Yeah. I mean, people think about it in terms of manifestation, right? We want to have something that we don't have right now. I think of it as a law. It's working all the time, every second of every day. It's working. It's not something that we can turn on or turn off whenever we choose to. So everything around us now is something we have attracted from our past, and we're attracting into our future based on everything about us now, right? I believe the whole of us is a signal. So it's our gender, it's our hair, it's our clothes, it's everything about us, including our thoughts. But now I have a deep understanding that the biggest part of our signal is the history, the trauma, the tension that we hold inside of us from our past. that is affecting us so much and we don't realize it. Right. So if we want to change our future, we have to change our signal right now in this moment. And we can do that multiple ways, right? We can do that. I mean, meditation is a form of relaxing.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because I read on your sheet that you don't meditate. I was like, wait, what? Let's talk about that.
Right. Okay. Well, meditation is beneficial in that, right? You're relaxing, you are calming yourself, you're coming more to peace in the moment. And then that's your signal. You're attracting more peace into your future. So it does change things. It is beneficial, but I wanted a deeper level change. I wanted my whole being to change so that I was attracting something different and so that I didn't have to meditate every day. I actually wanted to be different. And so that's why I went for the tools I used, which I felt were changing me at a physical level.
So what was sort of that first tool? And then how old were you? How many years after you found your mother did you actually are you like, this is like, things are not working so well for me. I'm just like throwing this at you. I don't even know if this is true. This is a pattern for 99% of the population. At what point were you like, I've got to look at this. I need tools. I need help. Traditional means are not cutting it.
It was a long time. I was in my late 30s. And I actually had like
too bad. I've heard a lot worse. I work with some people who are in their 60s and 70s.
I guess. So yeah, I had kind of like a business altercation with a couple of other mothers at my boys' school. They thought I had done something wrong and they were very confident, self-assured women, and I was not. And so it started spinning in my head, like what the words they said, what happened, it just went over and over and over again in my mind. And I couldn't sleep for days. And I realized, this isn't normal. Other people, I'm sure, do not do this. So it kind of felt a little bit like how I reacted when my dad told me I'd done something wrong and I just couldn't get over it. So that's when I realized, maybe there's something from my childhood that I haven't looked at yet. And that actually happened in that time frame. I can't remember how long it was after. But I went to a doctor's appointment. He was a holistic physician, and he recognized I was more stressed than I should be because I was a stay-at-home mother with two young boys. It shouldn't be too stressful. So he asked me on a scale of 0 to 10 what my stress level was, and it was an 8. And then he asked me why. And that's when I knew that it was finding my mother 2 decades earlier because the tears were still just under the surface.
Oh, that reminds me of a quote. It's a Chinese proverb. The body sheds the tears the eyes refuse to shed. It's like the body it'll come out somewhere in the body if you're not letting it out emotionally.
Right. Or it's that pressure that we feel holding it in, right? Yeah. And it wasn't until that point where he worked with this technique, EFT, it's called EFT, it's short for emotional freedom technique. It's also called tapping. He worked with me on my mother's death for about 15 minutes. And I walked away from that appointment, having shed some tears without the emotion. I could tell the story in my mind without the emotions there anymore. And that was my first realization that we just hold these memories and these emotions inside of our physical body and we can let them go.
So let's go back a little bit to the meditation piece. So you say you wanted to go deeper. You wanted to sort of climb into, I don't know, I look at meditation now more as like some kind of a spiritual connection. And I know the word spiritual means different things to different people. To me, it's connecting with my own soul, my own divinity, if you will, the part of me that isn't in this physical form that's sort of guiding my life, and God, you could say too. I know that that's just, there's so much with the term spiritual. For me, life doesn't work so well unless I'm connecting into that. So when you say go deeper, like walk me through that. So, but you did say that part of it is the trauma release. You have to get out those negative emotions that are sort of like in the way of you really having that connection, right? Sometimes Absolutely. Those are so up that like it's spiritual to just be with them. Like that is the meditation.
Right. And there are different forms of meditation, right? There are some Vipassana meditation, where you actually are feeling into the body. And
Mm-hmm.
that's as much as I know about it, but I believe that's the case, right? So there are different forms of meditation. Let me tell you a story from before COVID, because I think this kind of, to me, it really explains some of this. So I had a tapping group before COVID, and we would all sit in a semicircle, and I would close our eyes, and I would play a series of chakra chimes just once. And then we would open our eyes and share our experience. Now, what I realized at this point is there are a spectrum of experience. So there's the person, excuse me, there's a person who only hears the chimes with their ears, just hear the sound vibrations with their ears. There are others who hear the sound vibrations with their ears, but they also feel some of them in their body. And then on the other end of the spectrum are those who can feel the sound vibrations deep inside their body. It's like a whole body experience. So there's a spectrum of awareness. So when I started out, I was in the position of only being able to hear the sounds with my ears. I didn't know there was any more depth of experience to be had. I didn't know what I didn't know. Right? But now I'm on the other end of that experience, the spectrum. I can feel sound vibrations throughout my body. I have a much deeper level of awareness. So I believe I'm more tuned in to spirit, because the resistance that was there holding that awareness away has been released through this work.
Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense, that different people have different sensory sensitivities. So like you're saying, some people are very auditory, and some people are very like the visceral experience. They move through somatically. Some people are in their head trying to analyze it all.
That's where I was.
Me too. But yeah, I'm curious about, let's talk about EFT, because I love EFT, and I learned the faster EFT model by Robert, I don't know his name. But I found that tool in my 30s as well. And it was for me also one of the first things that I was like, oh, I can command this. I can command this body. I can command these stuck emotions. Like, I'm not beholden to, I mean, it is helpful to have practitioners, don't get me wrong, but like it was something I could take home and do on my own. It was a method. And that was super empowering for me, because I like the idea of having that self-reliance, I guess, or just being able to, it was empowering.
Yeah, to me too, because I wasn't willing to share my deepest thoughts and feelings with someone else. So I did, after that doctor's appointment, I went home and I went online and learned how to do it, because the person who developed it, Gary Craig, gave it away for free. So you can learn it online. One of the things to notice, be aware of when you're learning it online, is a lot of the practitioners these days have gone more towards the positive, but the power in EFT is working on the negative. So, just be aware of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I did the original version and then I moved to the faster, like I said, and I think the faster has its place, but I just like the idea of diving really deep into those memories and emotions and stating all the negative feelings you have. It is what it is. We don't want to bypass over that.
Right. But finding our truth is actually a little tricky, because we hide it so well.
Yeah.
And we also think we shouldn't be thinking negative things, right? We're kind of trained that way.
Yeah.
But for me, the really useful thing was that I actually had an experience with it that showed me the freedom was on the other side. The doctor's experience was actually really beneficial, but I also went home, and I had a 17-year-old cat at home who had been told needed daily saline shots. He was starting to fail. And the first time I gave him a shot, I was so afraid of giving him this shot, and my hand was just shaking uncontrollably. I wasn't going to be able to do it every day. It's just ridiculous. So I used this as an example. So I actually tapped about my fear of giving him the shot, about my hand shaking, about my memory around injections, because I'd had a lot. So every aspect of that one experience, I tapped about it. And the next day, the needle just slid right in. All the fear had gone. And it was such a huge shift for me. That's when I realized, it's a deceptively powerful technique. It looks a little silly because we're tapping on our body.
Yeah, all these little points.
Something.
sides of your head, under your nose. And yeah.
So it's hard to believe it's really doing much. But for me, that experience really showed that it was very beneficial. And that's when I started using it every day.
I love that. So that's was kind of my gateway drug was EFT as well. So let's go to the next step. So you started to recognize that, hey, I have this stored trauma, from my past, and I started tapping, and then I can even use it in present time, with the cat. And so what was the next jump for you? Because, you made lots of leaps after that.
Right. So I started using it every day, but I realized I knew there was a technique where you could write down every emotional trauma or every emotional memory from childhood. So I did that. It's like 3 or 4 pages. And I worked through one each night. I tapped for about an hour to an hour and a half each night.
Oh my goodness.
And I let go of these traumas.
Seriously, let's honor that. I wish everyone would do that. I wish I could do that.
It made such a huge difference.
Like, why not? It's there. What's the fear? Let's walk people through that. What is the actual fear that is keeping people in resistance from doing that, from unpacking their past, from diving in and journaling and tapping and sort of laying out, okay, this is what happened and this is how I feel about it. Why do we avoid that?
Well, we have something else we'd rather do. Right. And we're afraid. Some of us are afraid. Some of us think those feelings will annihilate us. Right. It's really scary to look into that darkness. So that's why, for me, having that cat experience and realizing the freedom was on the other side, and knowing that it's just energy that's stuck inside, right? Because those memories don't exist anywhere else. They don't exist outside of us, right? Even my brother's memory was totally different from my memory. So we're the ones that can look into it. So you do have to really want it. I really wanted to change. So, and as I did more of it, right, my mind actually started to change. My reality started to change. I remember opening my kitchen door and saying to myself, it feels like I'm in a different reality, because those voices in my head, right, the words that I would criticize myself and judge other people with, they were gone. I didn't even know that was possible. And I didn't know until I experienced it that it had happened. So so
you consistently, and I think this is a huge key of this, because you said you did it every night. When I hear about people sort of in a healing crisis or wanting to do, quote unquote, the work, capital T, capital W, it's usually a stop-start process, because they start to dive in and it gets so heavy. I mean, people sometimes have to take a break from therapy for a while. Just had a conversation with a really good friend of mine who lives back east, and she was telling me that she was getting so into this like heart of this trauma that it was just absolute suffering. So she had to tell her therapist, I needed a little bit of a hiatus, and he gave her a couple of things she could work on at home. I think there are periods of rest is what I'm saying with this, but there are some people, maybe you're one of them, that just charge in and like really stay consistent with it. And you're going to have a breakthrough. If you are consistent, it's not if, it's when. And I think consistency and persistence, like you said, like, it's scary. It's scary for all of us, but you just do it anyway. You show up. And that is the work.
Right. And to me, knowing that it's just stuck energy in the body and it wants to leave, right? So the faster I allow it to leave, the faster I get to freedom on the other side.
One of the ways that it was explained to me too, because it usually is inner child stuff. It's usually a reaction that our inner child is having as an adult. That it's almost like you're mothering yourself. You're picking up your little baby or your little toddler self or your little girl self or your adolescent self or your young adult self. And you're literally like looking them in the eyes and holding them and saying, I've got you. For me, that was because I do have a lot of kids. And so for me, the mothering metaphor just clicked for me as in terms of how I need to turn that on myself. If I'm getting triggered by something, it's an unhealed piece in me. It's not about the person or the situation. It's something that's been triggered in me. So so your first step is sort of like you wrote out in detail, you said an hour and a half a night.
I was tapping for an hour and a half a night.
Tapping for an hour and a half with some journaling, I'm assuming, because you have to kind of write out if you do it the right way.
I just knew what the subject was or the memory was that I was tapping on, and I just tapped through the whole memory over and over again, right? Accepting, like you said, accepting those feelings as I went. The tapping allows that accepting to happen until it just becomes a story, right? And it's just words. There's no emotion,
charge,
and no charge
to it. Yeah.
Right.
So then what happened after that?
So as I went through this, I believe it's an expansion of awareness, right? I didn't really know what that word meant when I started this journey, but I have a deep awareness now, right? So as we talked about with the sounds, and when I started out, I didn't really have the awareness of how I felt in any moment. But as I did more and more tapping, I became aware of my emotions throughout the day. And underneath the emotions, underneath the words, are a set of physical sensations. Right? So we use the word sadness or frustration or anger, but what we're really describing is a set of physical sensations that we're experiencing. We kind of get dissociated from that in childhood, like when our parents say, oh, you look like you're angry, right? Then we don't think about those sensations anymore, the tension that we're holding maybe in our jaw or our abdomen. We just use the words, right? So this is kind of reversing that process. So I became aware of the physical sensations. And at that point, I didn't feel like I needed to use EFT as much. I could have done, because I could have tapped on, this frustration I can feel in my ribs. I could have tapped using those words, but I didn't feel like I needed to. I just felt the feelings. So I'd been in a group at the time, and the guy, the kind of guru in the group, said, this is where the meditation came in. He said, you don't need to meditate. It's all about feeling your feelings. But he never explained what that meant. And I never asked. I still can't understand that. But
that's actually deep. Let's just think about that for a minute. Because the whole purpose of meditation, like I said, is connection. And so if you are feeling your feelings, you're connecting to what is. I don't know if you have any kind of a religious background, but I was taught growing up, and some of it was cultural, but some of it was actual like doctrinal basis, part of the dissemination of teachings, if you will, where that if you're feeling uncomfortable, that's Satan, or there's some confusion in place, that means that it's not the right thing. And so there's something wrong with you, and you need to fast and pray and do all these spiritual practices, maybe even like meditation, right? So that you're not feeling this uncomfortable thing. And I don't know if that was part of your traditional experience. I knew you grew up in England, so yeah, it may or may not have been. But I do work with people who we're having to unpack trauma from that, literal childhood trauma, that they've personalized these normal human reactions as making them less than spiritually or unworthy, if you will.
Interesting. Yeah. And yet they are just physical sensations. Yeah. Which I believe it's just energy that's been stuck in the body. So at one point during this journey, I started to become aware of those physical sensations, and I thought, okay, I'm going to try and do what he says. What does it mean to feel your feelings? So I would do it when I was at the kitchen sink. I was doing the dishes and recognize, okay, that thought was emotional. There's emotion there. So how can I feel those feelings? And this will kind of tie back into what you were talking about with your yoga guru. I realized to actually feel those sensations and keep my awareness on the sensations, I actually had to stop and be a statue, because as soon as I moved or took a deep breath, I couldn't focus on them anymore. So I had to actually stop my breath right there and hold myself like a statue to feel those sensations and keep my awareness on the sensations. And I would talk to them in my mind to try and fully feel them and accept them, because I was so good at suppressing them that they would want to squirm away. So I would feel them, and I would
tricky little devils, aren't they?
Absolutely. So I would say things like, okay, I can feel you. Normally for me, it was fear and in my solar plexus area. So I can feel you right there. I can feel this tension right there in my solar plexus, and it's okay. I'm just going to allow you to be felt, accept you, feel you, and just accept you. And then there would be a release. I'd have to take a deep breath. There would be a release. And then I would think the thought that had the emotion again and feel where it might have shifted somewhere. It might have not be quite as intense. And I would do it again and again and again with the same thought until there was no more emotion underneath that thought. So I'm kind of doing the same thing that I was doing.
Did it stick? Like, sorry to interrupt you. Did it stick? Like, do you feel like that healed it, or do you feel like it kept coming back in other forms for you to re-experience and deal with?
It for that thought, it was a permanent shift, but awesome. The same feeling, the same emotion would come up with many other thoughts. So it's a layer by layer process. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
But at least for that particular, dysfunctional belief or thought, negative emotion, negative connotation to a thought, you were able to take and deconstruct that to the extent that it had no more power over you for that.
Absolutely. Yes. Like with EFT, I got to the place, and I don't recommend this to begin with, but I got to the place where I would tap for 2 or 3 hours of a few weeks. I hate myself. Like, people will say, don't say that. But if that's what you're really feeling, and I tapped on that thought until there was no emotion left. It has no power over me anymore. And it's really freeing to get to that place where, I tapped on, I'm not worthy, right? I'm unlovable. All those feelings that I had lived with for many, many years until there's no longer any power underneath them. So yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. It's an amazing journey.
So you started with just this, okay, it's about my body. Really, this is what I'm hearing from you. Like you had this whole awakening of like, it's living inside me somewhere. All these things that I'm, the reality of my life is a reflection of my inner state. So you went through the EFT and you used that as a tool and a method, and you had coming back into also like feeling these sensations in your body, the sensory awareness. And then what was the next layer?
So now, instead of tapping at night, I actually would lay on the sofa, and I would work more with collective traumas, right? Because we all have our own story around collective traumas, our own feelings. So I would think about something like 9/11, like feel all those physical sensations inside my body and hold my awareness on it until it released, and over and over and over again. So I'm just kind of working with a deeper level almost. I needed to work on more things because I kind of worked on my childhood. So I kept going. And it was actually at some point during this period, I did experience Kundalini energy, which was kind of fun. That was for months.
So powerful. Yeah. We could do a whole episode just on that.
Yeah. But at some point I realized I could actually keep my awareness inside my body after the tension had released, which was really weird at the time. I didn't really know what I was doing. And the only way I can really explain it, or try to explain it, is imagine you have a toothache or a stomach ache. You can kind of pinpoint with your mind where that's coming from. You can feel that pain inside. But once the pain has dissipated, you can no longer find this exact place again with your mind because it's gone. The tension is gone. I could keep my awareness inside on that place.
So you dialed in on the tension. You dialed in on what's happening deeper than this thought or even this sensory reaction. What's going on underneath?
Right. Well, once the tension once the physical sensations dissipated, which was itself tension, once that tension dissipated, I could keep my awareness inside. There's no longer any tension. The tension is gone, but I could keep my awareness inside. So I was kind of working in my lower right abdomen at the time. So I would try and do it again. Say, okay, can I put my awareness back inside? And I found that I could. So I'm just playing around. Can I move it around? Well, I found that I could move my awareness around until I found another area of tension. So I could kind of differentiate tension or no tension. And then I would do the same thing. I would hold my awareness on this tension and keep my awareness there until there was a shift. And I would do it again and again and again until the tension had dissipated. So now I'm working at a deeper level still than I was before. And so I worked through it, kept doing it in my body. It actually took months and months until I could actually put my awareness inside my head.
Ooh.
And
Yeah, that's really powerful. You said something to me earlier about having this tension is in the tissues. It's kind of locked there. That's why you feel it sensorially. That's why we can now feel it physically. First, it was just energy and motion or emotion. Then it got embedded really energetically into the tissues. And geez, I was teaching this stuff, 10, 15 years ago. People thought I was in that case. What do you mean we hold emotion in our tissues? Now people are like accepting that this is this is a real thing. So anyway, so you said to me earlier that that tension resides there in the tissues, that you had this awareness that now once it shows up as a physical sensation or a tension point, you know that you can locate it instead of, I can't tell you how many times we'll feel a pain in our body or something. And we'll just, after a while, we become so dulled to that pain and desensitized to it that it takes a bigger pain. It takes let's just say maybe like an autoimmune issue, or it could be a myriad of things like a back injury, like you pull your back out. That was a process that led up to that. It was a habitual ignoring sometimes of these symptoms and these tensions that want our attention.
Right. I love that word.
Attention.
Yeah. So I realized, through this process that it's all stored physically in the body. It's just at those early levels with EFT, I didn't really recognize that. But now I can actually sense it. I sense that physical tension on the inside. So all along, even when we're just working with emotions, we are actually releasing at a physical level. We're just not aware of where we're releasing necessarily.
And all the more reason, because I interview a lot of people who talk about the necessity and cruciality of like moving your body through exercise or sweating or yoga or just something where you're moving that energy through the tissues and the muscle fibers and things, because the blocks are a real thing. If you don't have flow happening energetically, and physically, everything's about flow, blood, lymph, all these things. So if you don't have flow and you're blocked, I just wanted to make a case for moving, like it could be anything, dancing, going for a walk, anything that moves that energy through.
Yeah, I actually feel after exercise that things are moving around more. It's actually easier to release tension after exercise because things are moving more. Yeah.
So interesting. So I want to just talk about I have like a super deep question for you, and I hope I'm not cornering you on this because it is a very deep question, and I think everyone has a different take on it. But what do you think the purpose of trauma is? Why do you think that why would a soul, let's just say your experience, why? This is like such an existential question. So I'm just curious because I know you teach about these things and you teach about the future of our planet. You teach a lot of these things about, kind of like everything happens for a reason, that kind of thing. But why trauma? Why this?
Right. It's interesting. I think we get programmed in childhood. I don't know why or whether we really choose. People say we choose what we're going to go through in life. I remember saying to myself when I was like after 19, after my mother had died, that there must be some reason that my birth story is just so crazy because my mother died. I went back to my birth mother that I met when I was 17. It was like, so there must be a reason for that. But I do think we get programmed in childhood, right, with that trauma, and we re-experience those things, those feelings over and over again until we release them. So I don't really think that there's a learning necessarily from that. I just think of us as a signal. We get all screwed up in childhood and then we get to release that. And I actually believe the more trauma we have, the greater our capacity for spiritual growth.
Yeah, I believe that.
Because
I don't like that, but I believe it too.
Right. But once we've gone through that spiritual growth, right, then it's a good thing, right? Because we've gone so far in one direction and now we can go so far in the other direction. So in that work of releasing all that trauma, we actually come to know ourselves better at a deeper level.
And we kind of know what we're made of. Like I was saying, it's very empowering when you can take a method and do the work yourself, with these support tools. I use a lot of sensory agents, sensory anchoring tools like essential oils and even crystals. I don't know what they're doing. I know that they have been around since ancient times and they hold intelligence and memory of the planet. And I don't know if there's a placebo effect, and I don't really care. I just know what works for me is to use outside, let's just say, things of the earth to ground me back so it can feel safe enough to go in and do this work that you're referencing. Creating safety, containers of safety is huge. So yeah, so let's go back to kind of what's happening we'll kind of wrap up with this. Like what's happening? What do you see happening right now, like on the earth and its evolution and all these people now talking about trauma? You couldn't talk about this even 5 or 6 years ago. It was, I want to say it was taboo, but it was like, nobody was really acknowledging they had it. Now everyone's like, oh yeah, I've got that going on.
Well, look at how much of what was hidden is being revealed, right? People are feeling free to really say their truth, right? So I think a lot of things that have been hidden that we have suppressed are actually now coming up to be looked at and released. Yeah, so we're getting to deeper levels, right? So when I was able to put my awareness inside my head and actually realize, I became aware of how much tension and pain and the forces pulling my head out of alignment were just massive. And so I was holding all that tension inside and had absolutely no awareness for 50 years that I had so much pain and tension inside my head, right? So if we are all feeling or holding
that realization together,
right,
kind of coming to that realization.
And it's coming for us to release, right? If we suppress it now again, then it's going to come back in our future, right? But if we actually feel it now and let it go, let all the fear of everything that's happening, just feel that fear, feel those sensations, let it go and come to peace with what's happening now, then that's the signal we're emitting. And that's what we can attract into our future.
That's beautiful. And coming back to my mothering metaphor of helping myself feel safe and heard, at the inner mothering or inner parenting, your wounded child. It's almost like, we're coming into this age where people are realizing that the person they're waiting for is themselves. Like there will be a lot of people along the way who will help you and guide you. And I love that I can be that kind of a person for someone else. At the same time, for most of my life, I believed that I was sort of, I want to say a victim of my circumstances, but I was waiting for something that was going to like heal me. And it's interesting, the lessons that the universe brings to you until you realize that you're the one you're seeking. The power is in you, and you're not a victim of your genetic inheritance or your circumstances or what you were born into. That's not there. And you will rise in spite of that. That's like you said, the more, I guess, negatively impacted you are, sometimes the higher you rise later in life because you recognize that those things were stepping stones to your growth.
Yeah. I mean, we don't necessarily take advantage of it. My brother had all those traumas and has passed already from alcoholism. So the capacity is there. But one of the things that I think people don't realize is that we have more control over what's happening than we think, right? We think things are happening outside of us, right? We hear things on the news or we see someone else arguing or whatever's happening, and we don't think we have any part of that. But our part of all of that is how we feel about it. And we can work with those feelings and let them go, right? And then we can become imperturbable, right? And when we're imperturbable, that's our signal. That's what's attracting our future. So we always have something that we can do, even if we're watching or listening to something outside of ourselves. If we notice how we're feeling and we feel those feelings and let them go, then we're growing.
Very, very well said. Well, Anne, it's been really great to talk to you today. Is there a place people can find you online?
Sure, there's my website, annhince.com. There's my book I wrote, A Pathway to Insight, that details the steps that I went through that someone else can do. I have a public Facebook page that people can find me on. Great. And I have a YouTube channel that has some videos, like a demonstration of EFT and feeling your feelings are on there.
Perfect. We'll put those things into the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for the great conversation.